Imagine waking up tomorrow.
Okay.
And you discover that the entire global world, or like the borders, the alliances, all the military standoffs you've known your whole life, they just dissolved, completely vanished overnight.
Right, just gone.
Yeah. And then imagine finding out that this massive tectonic shift didn't happen because of some brilliant mastermind playing 3D chess.
Exactly.
It wasn't a covert CIA operation. It wasn't this grand benevolent strategy by the Soviet Union.
No, not at all. It was actually the result of a spectacular cascade of human error.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. We're talking about a flustered bureaucrat literally misreading his notes.
Yeah.
A terrified local official who just, well, refused to pick up a telephone.
A mid-level border guard who got insulted by his boss.
Yes, exactly that.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at Mary Elise Sarotte's meticulously researched book, The Collapse, and we're diving into these recently declassified Cold War archives.
Along with some incredibly candid first-hand interviews.
Right. And our mission today, for you, the listener, is to shatter this illusion of inevitability. Because we look back at the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and we think, well, of course it fell.
Right. You see the archive footage, people are dancing on the concrete, they're swinging sledgehammers.
Taking chunks of the wall home as souvenirs.
Exactly. And it feels like destiny. You think democracy won, the system was unsustainable, so of course it collapsed.
But history is not a neat straight line.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the archives show a completely different story. It's almost anti-common sense.
It really forces us to rethink how historical change actually happens. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we often comfort ourselves with this idea that the people at the top are in control.
The presidents, the generals.
Right. We think they have absolute control of the machine. But the reality, history is incredibly brittle.
Brittle. I like that word for it.
It's driven by miscommunication, panic, economic desperation, and honestly, just pure unfiltered accident. So we're going to walk you through how the most impenetrable, heavily militarized border in human history was dismantled by a series of comical, yet incredibly high-stakes blunders.
But to truly understand how absurd the collapse was, we first have to understand just how suffocating the setup was.
Right. Because this wasn't just a political disagreement. This was the densest military standoff on the planet.
To put the geography into perspective for you, just think about West Germany in 1989. It's a relatively narrow country. In some places, it was only about as wide as Long Island, New York.
Wow, that is narrow.
Very. Yet crammed into that tiny, vulnerable strip of land were 900,000 Allied troops.
900,000? That's almost 1 million heavily armed soldiers.
Yes. American, British, French, West German. Constantly running drills. Constantly on high alert.
And staring right back at them. Just across the border in East Germany, you have 380,000 Soviet Red Army soldiers.
Plus the entire East German military apparatus.
I mean, nuclear warheads are positioned, targeted, and ready to launch in both directions. The tension is literal. You could practically feel it in the concrete.
But here is the paradox that really stands out in the sources. The East German ruling party, the SED, they were obviously paranoid about NATO and the West.
Sure, that makes sense.
But they were infinitely more terrified of their own citizens.
And that brings us to the Ministry for State Security, the Stasi.
Right. If you want to understand why the East German state eventually imploded, you have to look at the sheer suffocating weight of its internal surveillance.
It's mind-blowing. They built the largest secret police force relative to population in recorded human history.
Let's do the math on this because it's staggering.
Yeah.
The Stasi had roughly 90,000 full-time staff members.
Okay, 90,000.
But then they had over 100,000 unofficial informants.
Unofficial, like just regular people.
Exactly. And when you compare that to other authoritarian regimes, the contrast is just wild.
Give me some context here.
Well, in the Soviet Union, the KGB operated with a ratio of roughly 1 secret police officer for every 600 citizens.
1 in 600.
Okay. In Czechoslovakia, it was 1 for every 900. In Poland, 1 for every 1,500.
And in East Germany.
1 full-time officer for every 180 citizens.
Wow.
But wait, when you factor in that network of secret informants, the ratio drops to, in fact, 1 in 10.
1 in 10. I mean, I try to visualize this for you, the listener, in your everyday life.
It's terrifying.
If you are sitting in a restaurant in East Berlin, or taking the train to work, or just, I don't know, having a beer with your bowling league.
1 out of every 10 people in that room is actively reporting conversations back to the government.
It's like a dystopian neighborhood watch where you legitimately cannot trust your own spouse. There are actual documented cases of husbands spying on wives, teenagers reporting their parents.
It completely destroyed basic human trust.
But here's what I just don't get. How does a machine, this meticulously designed to hear everything, suddenly go totally deaf at the most critical moment in history?
That is the ultimate blind spot of total control.
What do you mean?
When a state relies on fear to that extreme degree, it inadvertently destroys its own ability to perceive reality.
Oh, because everyone is lying.
Exactly. Think about the psychology of an informant. If you are terrified of the Stasi, are you really going to report that the people in your apartment building are deeply unhappy?
That they are organizing against the state? That the socialist project is failing?
No, because then you're the guy bringing bad news to a dictator.
You'd probably get interrogated just for hearing the bad news.
Precisely. So the informants start filtering the reports. They tell their handlers exactly what the handlers want to hear.
Wow, so it's an echo chamber.
A massive one. The handlers then filter that information before passing it up to the regional directors, who filter it again before it reaches the Politburo.
So by the time the intelligence reaches the supreme leadership, it is basically a complete work of fiction.
Right. They had built a machine that fed them a comforting illusion of total obedience.
It made the regime incredibly brittle. They couldn't adapt to sudden shocks because they genuinely didn't know what their own population was actually feeling.
And the ultimate physical manifestation of that brittle control was the Berlin Wall itself.
We tend to think of it as just a concrete barrier, but the reality of the death strip was a highly engineered 97-mile machine.
It was designed specifically to trap human beings. Alarm fences, dog runs, watchtowers, overlapping fields of fire.
And the East German government publicly called it the anti-fascist protection rampart. They claimed it was built to keep Western spies and capitalist saboteurs out.
But the architecture tells the real story. All the defenses, the tripwires, the orientation of the guards, it was all designed to keep their own people in.
And to maintain that captive population, the regime engaged in a very dark, incredibly cynical game.
The plausible deniability regarding lethal force.
This part of the archives is genuinely chilling. There are at least 1,700 recorded incidents of shots being fired at people trying to escape across the Berlin Wall.
1,700 times.
Yet, officially, the East German leadership constantly denied that they had a formal shoot-to-kill order.
They kept the written instructions deliberately vague. The standing orders would say things like, stop escapees by any means necessary, or prevent border breaches.
So they could tell the international community, hey, we don't shoot our own people. We just enforce our sovereign borders.
But the reality on the ground was entirely different. If a border guard successfully shot and stopped an escapee, they weren't reprimanded for using excessive force.
They were rewarded.
Highly rewarded. They received the Shooter's Corps decoration, they got monetary bonuses, they even got extra vacation time.
They incentivized murder while officially denying it.
It was institutionalized hypocrisy.
But if you think that hypocrisy is bad, we have to talk about the 96,000 mark flesh trade.
This is truly one of the most astonishing economic policies of the Cold War.
Because while the regime claimed to despise Western capitalism ideologically, they were secretly selling their own captive citizens to West Germany for hard currency.
To understand this, you really have to look at the macroeconomics. By the 70s and 80s, the East German economy was quietly failing.
They were cut off from global markets.
Right. Their central planning was incredibly inefficient. They desperately needed Western currency, Deutschmarks, to buy essential goods, technology, and, honestly, simply to service their international debt.
So they created a covert, highly transactional loophole. Between 1963 and 1989, West Germany literally bought the freedom of an estimated 33,000 East German political prisoners.
33,000 people. And it was a formalized, albeit secret, system. The prices were essentially fixed on a sliding scale based on the value of the prisoner.
Wait, they had a price list for humans?
Effectively, yes. If West Germany wanted to buy the freedom of a separated family member, it might cost around 4,500 Deutschmarks. But if it was a high-profile political prisoner, an intellectual, or someone who had been deeply critical of the regime,
How much?
the price tag could jump up to 96,000 Deutschmarks.
Stop and think about the cognitive dissonance of that. You have a communist state that constantly preaches the moral superiority of its system,
Yes.
yet it treats its own dissenting citizens as a cash crop. They are literally farming political prisoners to generate foreign exchange.
What's fascinating here is the total hypocrisy of the system. But this created a massive vulnerability for East Germany.
Oh, so?
They became addicted to that Western cash. It meant that West Germany, and by extension Western human rights groups, had actual leverage.
Oh, I see. They could twist the arms of the East German Politburo.
Exactly. If the GDR behaved too brutally, the West could threaten to cut off the secret funding that was keeping the East German economy afloat.
There were even those aimed to miss campaigns by Western groups, targeting border guards.
Right. The West was constantly pushing back.
Which brings us to the tipping point. The lie that the entire system was built upon finally begins to unravel in early 1989. And it starts with a single bullet.
A tragedy that accelerated the collapse of the whole country.
A soldier fires a shot, gets a medal, and unknowingly sets in motion the destruction of his own regime.
This is the deeply tragic story of Chris Geoffroy.
Let's talk about Chris.
In February 1989, Chris is a 20-year-old waiter in East Berlin. He works at a restaurant that serves a lot of Western diplomats and journalists.
So he's hearing things.
Yes. He hears them talking about Paris, about America, about the world outside. He's young, he's a gymnast, and he is thoroughly sick of living in a captive state.
And he hears a rumor, right, a false rumor that the shooting order at the wall has been quietly suspended.
Right. The rumor was that because the East German leader, Erich Honecker, was about to visit the West, they wouldn't dare shoot anyone.
But it was completely unfounded.
Completely. But Chris believed it. On the night of February 5th, he and a friend decided to make a run for it.
Because Chris was a gymnast, he honestly believed he had the physical strength to just vault his way through the obstacles.
But the moment they hit the death strip, the alarms tripped.
2 guards opened fire, then 2 more joined in.
And these weren't warning shots. One guard literally braced his weapon on an electrical box to steady his aim and shot Chris straight in the heart from about 100 feet away.
He died instantly.
He did. And true to form, the shooter received his decoration, his bonus, and was celebrated by his commanding officers.
But they miscalculated the geopolitical climate. And more importantly, they miscalculated Chris's mother, Corinne Geoffroy.
The Stasi immediately brought her in. They didn't even let her see the body.
That is so cruel.
They interrogated her relentlessly, 5-6 hours a day, multiple times a week. They wanted to break her into silence to keep the incident quiet.
But she fought back in the only way she could. And this is incredible. She knew the regime occasionally let elderly people travel to the West.
Usually because they hoped the elderly would just stay there and stop being a drain on the East German healthcare system.
Right. So Corinne asked a friend's grandmother who was traveling to West Berlin to do her a massive favor.
A huge risk.
Corinne took a tiny passport photo of her dead son, hid it inside a matchbox, and had the grandmother smuggle it across the border.
That tiny photo completely changed the narrative. The grandmother gave the photo to Western media.
And suddenly, West German television, which, remember, could be broadcast directly back into East German living rooms, was showing the face of the victim.
It wasn't just an anonymous statistic anymore. It was Chris, a handsome 20-year-old kid.
Why was this specific incident the breaking point, though? I mean, hundreds of people had been shot before. Why did Corinne's matchbox photo cause such a panic in the Politburo?
Because the timing was a nightmare for the East German leadership. By early 1989, Mikhail Gorbachev was pushing his reforms in the Soviet Union.
Right, the whole international community was watching.
Exactly. They were watching the Eastern Bloc to see if human rights were actually improving. Corinne's actions forced the West to broadcast the brutality.
It became a PR nightmare they could no longer hide.
The international revulsion was so loud and so public that even a hardliner like Erich Honecker realized he had a serious problem. The West German cash flow was threatened.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Honecker blinks.
He does.
He quietly orders the border guards to suspend the use of firearms. They stop shooting.
And that is the fatal crack in the armor. A dictatorship relies on the absolute certainty of violence.
Once the population senses that the regime is hesitant to pull the trigger, the fear evaporates.
Exactly.
But here is where the story takes a massive geographical detour. Honecker stops the bleeding in Berlin, but he completely misses that a fatal blow is quietly brewing hundreds of miles away.
Yes, down in Hungary.
Because while East Germany is trying to manage the PR fallout of a shooting, Hungary is looking at its ledger books and deciding to cut a wire.
This is a perfect example of how interconnected and fragile the Soviet bloc was. In the spring of 1989, Hungary is facing a severe economic crisis of its own.
They need money.
They desperately need Western economic support. The new Hungarian prime minister needs IMF loans. He wants favorable trade agreements with the West.
And Hungary shares a border with Austria, which is the West. For 20 years, Hungary had strictly guarded that border with an electronic barbed wire fence.
Right. If an East German citizen went on vacation to Hungary, which was one of the few places they were allowed to travel, and tried to sneak across to Austria, the Hungarians would arrest them.
And hand them straight back to the Stasi?
But by 1989, that physical fence was rusting. The alarm systems were failing.
And the Hungarian prime minister looked at the cost of repairing the fence and realized Hungary simply couldn't afford it.
He really couldn't. Furthermore, tearing it down would be a massive symbolic gesture of goodwill to the West. It practically guaranteed the loans he needed.
So he ordered the border fence to be dismantled.
He did.
It's amazing. He didn't do it to overthrow the East German government. He wasn't trying to end the Cold War.
No.
He literally just didn't want to pay for a new fence.
Precisely. But for hundreds of thousands of East Germans, this was the golden ticket.
They accidentally punched a hole in the Iron Curtain that couldn't be plugged.
Word quickly spread that the Hungarians were no longer strictly enforcing the border. If you could get to Hungary, you could walk into Austria.
And from Austria, you could take a train to West Germany, where you would automatically be granted citizenship.
So you have this massive exodus. By the fall of 1989, an astonishing 600,000 East Germans flee through that Hungarian border.
600,000. The visual details from the archives here are cinematic. You have to picture this. People were driving their little East German Trabant cars as close to the border as possible.
Grabbing whatever they could carry.
And just running across the fields. There were literal acres of abandoned cars left rusting in the Hungarian mud. People were abandoning their entire lives just for a chance at the West.
It was a demographic hemorrhage. East Germany was losing its doctors, its engineers, its young workforce. The state was bleeding out.
And this is where Erich Honecker, in a state of absolute panic, makes what might be the stupidest decision in Cold War history.
It was incredibly counterproductive.
On October 3rd, 1989, Honecker decides to completely seal the country. He bans all travel.
Not just to the West. He bans visa-free travel to fellow communist states like Czechoslovakia.
Suddenly, East Germans need a special passport and a hard-to-get visa just to cross any border.
Think about the physics of a pressure cooker.
Okay.
The Hungarian border was the exhaust valve. The most dissatisfied, motivated citizens were leaving. They were taking their anger with them.
Right.
Honecker took a welding torch and welded that exhaust valve completely shut. He trapped all that kinetic, angry energy inside the country.
It is face-slapping irony. By trying to assert ultimate control, the government instantly radicalized the millions of people trapped inside who previously had no intention of protesting.
Because if you know you have an out, if you know you could theoretically escape through Hungary, you might keep your head down and just tolerate the regime.
But the moment you are told, the door is locked forever.
Political scientists often say that citizens in a dictatorship have three choices: loyalty, exit, or voice.
Wow. Loyalty, exit, or voice.
Honecker unilaterally removed the exit option, which meant the only option left for millions of frustrated citizens was voice.
Yeah.
They had to speak up.
And that voice started to get very loud very quickly, largely because of another bizarre, prideful blunder by the regime.
The saga of the sealed trains.
Exactly. Because before Honecker completely locked the borders, thousands of East Germans had managed to cross into Czechoslovakia, but they couldn't get from there to the West.
So they did something desperate. They stormed the West German embassy in Prague.
Thousands of East Germans trapped themselves in the West German embassy. It became a massive humanitarian crisis.
You had thousands of people squatting in the mud of the embassy gardens. Winter was approaching. The sanitary conditions were appalling.
West Germany desperately wanted to take these refugees in, and they negotiated a deal with the East German leadership to let them go to the West.
But Honecker couldn't just let them quietly board buses in Prague and drive to Munich. His ego wouldn't allow it.
No. He insisted that the sealed trains must physically travel through East German territory.
He wanted to pretend they were expelling them. The bureaucracy demanded that these people be formally stripped of their citizenship on East German soil.
He wanted to broadcast a message to his people: we are expelling these traitors. Good riddance.
Exactly.
It is the most absurd logic imaginable. It's like parading a lifeboat full of rescued passengers straight through the middle of the dining room of a sinking ship and telling everyone left on board not to look.
It really is. What did he think was going to happen?
Right. What happened was entirely predictable to anyone not blinded by authoritarian hubris.
The trains traveled through the Saxony region of East Germany. And as they passed through cities and towns, they ignited massive riots.
People rushed the train tracks. They were throwing their ID cards at the trains.
Trying to physically jump onto moving rail cars.
The East German police were out in full force, beating people back with truncheons. It was visceral, violent chaos.
And this chaos directly catalyzed something much larger. It fueled the massive protests in Leipzig.
The Leipzig miracle.
For years, a small group of dissidents had been holding Monday prayer meetings for peace at the Nikolai Church in Leipzig.
For a long time, it was just a few dozen people.
The Stasi watched them, but largely tolerated them because they were so small.
But after the borders were sealed and after those trains rolled through, those prayer meetings exploded.
We're talking about a leap from a few dozen people to 10,000, then 50,000.
And eventually, by late 1989, 500,000 people marching in the streets, half the population of the entire city.
This raises an important question. How do people in a society completely riddled with spies where you can't trust anyone suddenly organize a massive protest?
Right, there's no social media, you can't put up flyers. If you even mention a protest on the telephone, the Stasi cuts the line. How does this happen?
It happens through the psychology of mass momentum. The visual of the trains proved that escape was possible.
The fear of missing out replaced the fear of the Stasi.
Exactly. The turning point is when the crowd reaches a critical mass. If 100 people protest, the Stasi arrests 100 people.
Sure.
But if 100,000 people march out of a church at the exact same time, the police literally do not have enough handcuffs or prison cells.
The logistical capacity of the surveillance state just breaks down.
Completely.
But the regime wasn't going to just watch them march. They were fully prepared to deploy the Tiananmen solution.
This is a crucial context that is often forgotten. Just a few months prior, in June 1989, the Chinese government had massacred peaceful protesters in Tiananmen Square.
And the East German leadership didn't just quietly observe this. They actively, publicly endorsed it.
Egon Krenz, who was a top Politburo member and would soon replace Honecker, actually flew to Beijing.
He shook hands with the Chinese leadership. He publicly praised them for their resolute action against counter-revolutionaries.
That wasn't just foreign diplomacy. That was a chilling, explicit threat broadcast directly to the people gathering in Leipzig.
The message was clear. We have the guns, and we are perfectly willing to use them on you.
And on October 9th, 1989, that threat nearly became a reality.
The situation in Leipzig was a powder keg. Over 100,000 unarmed protesters gathered in the city center.
And waiting for them was a massive, highly coordinated killing machine.
The archives show the sheer scale of the preparation. The regime deployed 4,100 heavily armed soldiers, riot police, and Stasi paramilitary units.
They had live ammunition distributed. They brought in extra blood supplies to the local clinics.
They systematically cleared hospital wards to make room for mass casualties. The bayonets on the rifles were literally fixed. They were ready for a bloodbath.
But the killing machine was paused by a terrified, low-level bureaucrat.
This is one of my absolute favorite moments in the entire history of the Cold War. Let's really break down this scene because it plays out like a tense political thriller.
It really does.
It's the evening of October 9th. The march is starting. The massive crowd is moving toward the armed cordons. The man in charge on the ground in Leipzig is a mid-level party official named Helmut Hackenberg.
He is staring out the window at this ocean of humanity.
Yeah.
He knows his orders are to stop the protest.
But to open fire on 100,000 people means starting a civil war.
Hackenberg is a loyalist, but he isn't suicidal. He knows that if he orders the massacre on his own authority, he will be held entirely responsible by the international community.
So he does what any good bureaucrat does. He tries to pass the buck up the chain of command.
He picks up the phone and calls the central command in Berlin. He needs Egon Krenz or Erich Honecker to explicitly say, yes, open fire.
But what happens? He calls, and nothing. Berlin is completely silent.
Nobody will give him an answer. He waits 10 minutes. The crowd is getting closer to the guns. He calls again. Still no explicit orders.
20 minutes pass, 30 minutes.
What's happening in Berlin is a collapse of nerve. The central leadership wanted the protest crushed, but they were too cowardly to put their names on the order.
They wanted plausible deniability. They were hoping Hackenberg would panic, give the order himself, and then if the global backlash was too severe, Berlin could just scapegoat him.
Right. They'd just say he acted as a rogue element.
45 minutes go by, the phone is dead, and Hackenberg realizes he is being set up.
He is terrified of being the fall guy for an atrocity that will define the century. So he makes a split-second calculus of self-preservation.
He commits mutiny. By doing absolutely nothing. He orders his men to stand down. He explicitly refuses to authorize the use of live fire.
The soldiers lower their weapons, and the 100,000 protesters march peacefully right past the armed cordons.
So what does this all mean? To me, it means dictatorships don't usually fall because the dictator has a change of heart. They fall because the middle managers realize the boss won't protect them anymore.
Precisely. Power is an illusion based on compliance. The moment the chain of command snapped in Leipzig, the regime lost its monopoly on violence.
And once a dictatorship loses its ability to instill credible fear, it is effectively dead.
But the regime didn't know it was dead yet. They still had control over the domestic media.
Right. The next day, the state-run newspapers and television stations simply pretended the Leipzig protest never happened.
They tried to enforce a total blackout. If the rest of East Germany didn't know Leipzig had successfully faced down the guns, the regime might still survive.
Which brings us to the crucial role of a smuggled VHS tape. The regime tried to black out the truth, but a videotape hidden in a pair of underwear destroyed their entire narrative.
The regime's blackout was completely bypassed by two incredibly brave activists, Ramer Domsky and Sigi Shefki.
These two guys knew that if there was no visual proof of the protest, the state narrative would win, so they smuggled a video camera into Leipzig.
They managed to sneak into the tower of a church that overlooked the protest route, hiding in the dark.
And they filmed the entire thing, the massive, endless, peaceful crowd. It was the ultimate, irrefutable proof that the regime had backed down.
But having the footage on a tape in a church tower in Leipzig doesn't help anyone. They had to figure out how to bypass the Stasi checkpoints and get that tape to the outside world.
And this sounds like something out of a spy novel. They met up with a trusted courier, a West German journalist who had clearance to cross the border.
The journalist took the VHS cassette, shoved it down into his underwear, and physically walked it through Checkpoint Charlie.
The border guards patted him down, but they didn't search him thoroughly enough.
Once that tape crossed into West Berlin, it was immediately broadcast on West German television news.
And here is the fatal geographic flaw of East Germany. West German television signals could be picked up by antennas across almost the entire territory of East Germany.
The East German state controlled the streets, but West Germany controlled the airwaves. The television signal was the ultimate weapon.
Millions of East Germans sat in their living rooms that night, defying the state simply by turning the dial on their TVs. And they watched the West German broadcast.
They saw the footage from Leipzig. They saw, with their own eyes, that 100,000 people had marched, and the Stasi hadn't stopped them.
The illusion of total control was shattered. The protests instantly spread from Leipzig to Berlin to Dresden to every major city.
The regime is completely reeling. And right at this moment of maximum instability, Czechoslovakia drops an absolute diplomatic bomb on East Berlin.
Right. Czechoslovakia gives East Germany an ultimatum. Fix your borders or we close ours.
The Czechoslovakian government was furious. Remember those sealed trains? The root of that problem hadn't been solved.
East Germans were still flooding into Czechoslovakia, trying to camp out at the West German embassy.
So the Czechoslovakian leadership basically said, stop your citizens from flooding our country, or we will completely close our borders to you.
The East German leadership is in full-blown panic. If Czechoslovakia closes its border, East Germany becomes a literal airtight prison.
The domestic protests will turn into a violent revolution. They need a new travel law, and they need it yesterday.
A law that creates a tiny, controlled release valve to let the most angry people emigrate, without actually tearing down the Berlin Wall.
To solve this, the Ministry of the Interior assigns the task of drafting a new regulation to a young, ambitious bureaucrat named Gerhard Lauter.
Lauter is a loyal company man. His instructions are very clear. Write a minor rule that allows a few people to emigrate permanently, one way, through a specific border crossing near Czechoslovakia.
Just enough to relieve the pressure. But Lauter wants to prove how efficient and comprehensive he is.
He sits down to draft the document, and he thinks, well, if we are regulating permanent immigration, we should probably add a clause clarifying the rules for temporary travel as well.
Just to make the document complete.
He is overachieving. He's doing extra homework.
Yes. And crucially, in his draft, he includes a phrase that changes history. He writes that this new streamlined application process for travel applies to exits via all border crossings, including West Berlin.
He literally wrote the Berlin Wall into the draft. Why would he do that?
Because he was a bureaucrat. Thinking like a bureaucrat. He assumed that the underlying mechanisms of control were still intact.
Oh, I see.
He assumed that citizens would still have to go to a police station, fill out an application, wait for weeks, and the Stasi would quietly deny 99% of the requests.
He didn't think he was opening the borders. He thought he was just saving the regime by making a clean, efficient rule. He was just streamlining the paperwork for denying people.
He had no idea he was pulling the foundational brick out of the wall.
Which perfectly sets up the most catastrophic 8 minutes in the history of global politics. Let's go to November 9th, 1989.
The 8-minute suicide.
The elite rulers of East Germany, the men who have ruthlessly maintained this police state for decades, are about to sign their own political death warrant in exactly 8 minutes.
And nobody even read the paperwork.
Egon Krenz, who has now taken over as leader, brings Lauder's draft to the Central Committee. It's late in the afternoon. The committee has been dealing with rolling crises for weeks.
Everyone in the room is exhausted, stressed, and desperate for a quick fix. Plus, Krenz hasn't even properly consulted the Soviets about this exact text.
He's flying blind, hoping to just get this off his desk.
He reads the text out loud to the room. Rapid fire. He asks if there are any objections.
Complete silence.
He pushes it to a vote. It passes unanimously. The entire process takes exactly 8 minutes.
8 minutes. They just voted to allow travel to West Berlin. And not a single person in that room paused to ask, wait, what does this actually mean for the checkpoints tomorrow?
They didn't even notify the border guards. They just stamped it and moved on to the next agenda item.
But the real disaster, the moment that turns a bureaucratic oversight into a global earthquake, happens an hour later at the daily press conference.
The man stepping up to the podium is the party spokesman, Günter Schabowski.
Schabowski wasn't at the committee meeting where they discussed the draft. He hasn't read the text.
As he is walking into the press room, Egon Krenz literally just shoves the piece of paper into Schabowski's hand and says, "Announce this."
The press room is packed. International journalists, television cameras rolling live. Schabowski spends most of the hour droning on about boring administrative reshuffles. He's sweating. He's tired.
Towards the very end of the conference, an Italian journalist asks a pointed question about the travel rules. It jogs Schabowski's memory. He remembers the paper Krenz handed him.
He pulls the paper out of his pocket, he puts his glasses on, and on live international television, he starts reading Lauder's overly broad draft aloud.
He reads, "Private trips abroad can be applied for without prerequisites."
You can see the journalists in the room collectively stop breathing. A British reporter shouts out the question that brings the whole system down. When does this take effect?
Schabowski is visibly flustered. He looks at the paper, he flips it over, he looks at his notes.
He's searching for an embargo date. He doesn't know that the rule was supposed to be implemented the next day in an orderly, bureaucratic fashion.
He doesn't want to look foolish in front of the world. So he looks up, scratches his head, and utters the words that ended the Cold War.
Immediately, right away.
In German. Sofort. Unverzüglich.
The room explodes. Journalists are literally leaping over chairs to sprint to the payphones in the hallway.
Because of a miscommunication, a misunderstanding of a draft he hadn't read, Schabowski just told the world that the Berlin Wall was open.
It's the ultimate anticlimax. It wasn't a grand decree. It was a guy who didn't do the reading for the group project and tried to wing it on live TV.
It was a catastrophic execution error. The West German news anchors interrupted their broadcasts immediately. The main evening news bulletin led with the headline, "The gates in the wall stand wide open."
And because we know the West German signal reached East Berlin, tens of thousands of East Germans heard that broadcast. They didn't wait for permission. They got off their couches, put on their winter coats, and walked straight to the wall.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most intensely human moment of this entire saga. The focal point of the collapse becomes a single checkpoint, Bornholmer Street.
And the fate of Europe rests on the shoulders of one man, Harold Jäger.
Harold Jäger is not a dissident. He is not a rebel. He is a Stasi officer, a lieutenant colonel in charge of the night shift at the Bornholmer checkpoint.
He is the ultimate loyal company man. He has 25 years of service. When he was a teenager, he literally helped mix the concrete to build the wall.
He believes in the socialist state. On the evening of November 9th, Jäger is sitting in the checkpoint cafeteria eating a sausage when he sees Schabowski's press conference on the television.
He nearly chokes on his food.
He knows, with absolute certainty, that he has received no new orders, no memos, no updated protocols, nothing.
Suddenly, he hears a commotion outside. He looks out the window, and there are people gathering at the gate. At first, it's a few dozen, then hundreds, then thousands.
Tens of thousands of East Germans are swarming the checkpoint, pressing against the barricade, screaming, "Open the gate!" Schabowski said it's open.
Jaeger runs to the phone. He calls his commanding officer, Colonel Ziegenhorn. He explains the situation. The crowd is massive. They want to cross. What are my orders?
Ziegenhorn has no idea. Nobody in the military or political leadership knows what to do because they were all blindsided by Schabowski's gaffe. Ziegenhorn tells Jaeger to just send the people home.
Jaeger tries. He goes out to the crowd and tells them they need to come back tomorrow with proper visas. But the crowd refuses to leave.
They are chanting. They are pushing. The sheer physical pressure of 20,000 bodies against the steel gates is terrifying.
Jaeger goes back inside. He is panicking. He has heavily armed guards under his command. He knows that if a barricade snaps or if someone gets pushed, a guard might panic and open fire.
He is staring down the barrel of a massive stampede or historic massacre. He calls Ziegenhorn again, begging for instructions.
Ziegenhorn decides to patch Jaeger into a conference call with the higher-ups in the Stasi command. And this is the moment the regime seals its own fate.
The generals and commanders are sitting safely in their bunkers, miles away from the chaos. One of them asks Ziegenhorn over the radio, is Jaeger capable of assessing the situation? Or is he just scared?
Ziegenhorn laughs. Over an open radio channel where Jaeger and other officers can hear, Ziegenhorn mocks Jaeger. He calls the massive crowd of citizens wild pigs. He insults Jaeger's courage and competence.
And something inside Harold Jaeger completely breaks. He has given his entire adult life to this state. He has sacrificed his morals to enforce their laws.
And in the ultimate moment of crisis, when he desperately needs leadership, his bosses abandon him. They cower in their bunkers, and then they have the audacity to insult his manhood.
It is a profound psychological pivot. The entire East German system was built on demanding blind, unquestioning obedience. But Jaeger suddenly realizes that the men demanding that obedience are cowards.
They are willing to let him take the blame for a massacre just to protect themselves.
He looks out the window at the crowd. He doesn't see wild pigs. He sees ordinary people. He sees families, neighbors, people in their pajamas and winter coats, just wanting to walk across the street.
When forced to choose between massacring his own people or disobeying an arrogant boss, human conscience finally won out over 25 years of programming.
At 11:30 p.m., November 9th, 1989, Harold Jaeger makes the call. He turns to his guards and gives an order he has never given in his life. Open the barrier.
The main gate swings open.
The dam breaks. 20,000 people surge through the Bornholmer checkpoint, cheering, crying, running into West Berlin.
Once Bornholmer opened, the news spread instantly to the other checkpoints along the wall.
The guards at those stations, seeing that Jaeger had yielded and still receiving no orders from their paralyzed leadership, followed suit. Within hours, the entire border apparatus collapsed.
You have Tom Brokaw broadcasting live on a cherry picker at the Brandenburg Gate. The world is watching in absolute shock. People are popping champagne on top of the concrete.
And it all traces back to one furious middle manager deciding he had finally had enough.
When you lay out the timeline like this, the sheer improbability of it all is staggering.
It is absolute insanity.
You have a paperwork error by a young bureaucrat trying to look efficient. You have a silent phone in Leipzig because of cowardice. You have a VHS tape smuggled in a journalist's underwear.
A flustered spokesman who didn't read his notes.
And an insulted border guard who opened a gate partly out of conscience and partly out of sheer spite.
The Berlin Wall didn't fall because we pushed it over. It fell because the regime tripped over its own shoelaces.
I think it's really important to pause here and look at this objectively. We aren't taking sides in the macro politics of the Cold War here. The archives make it abundantly clear.
Neither Western capitalist genius nor Soviet strategic planning ended this era.
It was the unpredictable, unmanageable, chaotic reality of human beings making mistakes under pressure.
Which leaves us with a lingering and I think deeply provocative thought for today. After 1989, the West spent decades patting itself on the back. There was this massive frenzy of triumphalism.
We thought we mastered history.
We thought the era of walls was over. But look around the world today. We are seeing new walls being built, both physical and digital. We're seeing new global standoffs emerging that feel just as tense as the Cold War.
Are we still blinded by the illusion that the people at the top are actually in control?
If the collapse of the Soviet bloc taught us anything, it's that extreme control is an illusion.
We might all just be one misunderstood memo, one silent phone call, or one insulted middle manager away from the next massive global paradigm shift.
It's a terrifying but fascinating reality to sit with.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I highly encourage you to question the official story of every major historical event you read about, because somewhere, buried in the archives, there is almost always a guy who didn't do the reading for the group project, accidentally changing the world. See you next time.